Russia's foreign minister has dropped any pretense and declared that they are in war with NATO. Is NATO finally going to wake up to the fact that they have a dangerous adversary on their doorstep? Or are NATO and European countries continue to put their head in the sand and pretend like Russia is not a threat? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Hit subscribe. And of course, if you can support us over on combatvetnews.com, those members make this whole thing possible. So, Lavrov, you guys know this is a deep Putin loyalist. He has served as Putin's foreign minister for over 2 decades, has declared that NATO and the EU are in a real war with Russia, right? Russia's foreign minister said that NATO and European Union members are using Ukraine to wage a war against his country in a speech on the sidelines of the UN on Thursday. Now, Britain said this is a false fantasy world of distortions, which is kind of insane to be like, listen, Russia invaded Ukraine. Russia declared war on the sovereign state of Ukraine, and they're like, NATO is helping. NATO didn't declare war on you, bro. You declared war on Ukraine, and their long-established allies have helped them out to some extent. Again, Britain is correct. This is a false fantasy world that he's living in. But the problem is that this is actually part of the naivete of the UK as well. Because a state of war exists between countries only from the perspective of those countries, right? As you can see, Lavrov's quote, another clear example is the crisis in Ukraine provoked by the West, through which NATO and the EU have already declared a real war on my country and directly involved it. This is, of course, insane. Ukraine had it coming, or Ukraine provoked us, is absolutely preposterous because, as we point out, Russia and Russian-backed separatists annexed Crimea. Well, Crimea is now a part of Russia. In 2014, annexed the Donbass that same year. And so somehow it was the West that actually antagonized Russia. Absolutely insane. But here's the problem. He says, NATO and the EU have already declared a real war on my country and are directly involved in it. And again, the notion of what it means to be directly involved in a conflict is also sort of stretched here because no uniformed EU troops have been killed in Ukraine in any capacity. And right, a state of war is something that a country can unilaterally declare. It doesn't have to be grounded in reality. Look, was the U.S. invasion of Iraq real? Did that really happen? Of course, we all agree that was a real war that really happened. But was the premise it was based on, the existence of WMDs held by Saddam Hussein, was that real? No. So you don't need to have a reality-based reason to engage in a war. You just have to simply declare it to be so. And so when someone like Sergei Lavrov says these things, right, and the EU's response is to literally be like, no, that's dumb, that's not real, right? We can agree that this is a Russian war, an unprovoked war of Russian aggression, absolutely true, a systematic campaign to annex its neighbors by force, absolutely true, and based on misinformation, propaganda, and total fantasy nonsense can all be true. But it is also true that the EU and NATO should probably wake up and say, yes, we are at war. This is a state of war. As we have talked about, Russian intelligence agents have lit the car of Keir Starmer, the UK Prime Minister, on fire, have thrown Molotov cocktails at his private residence. That, I don't know, that sounds like kind of an assassination attempt on your country's prime minister. Sounds like an act of war. And the burning of German military vehicles on a military base that were scheduled to deliver aid, military assistance to Ukraine. Do you think that's also an act of war, attacking someone's military? These are all things that Russia has explicitly done. They've been linked to. This is done by FSB proxies. So the question is not, is the EU at war with Russia? Russia says it. Russian actions reflect it, right? Again, shooting military drones into Poland is an act of war. Flying your armed jets on an attack run towards the Estonian capital is an act of war. Stating we are at war with this country is an act of war. And yet the EU's response is to still continue to have a policy of doing fuck all. It's completely insane. It is a level of delusion that is almost preposterous. Now, I understand why. The why is that the EU is afraid that if they say, listen, we're going to intervene, we're going to help on behalf of Ukraine, and that is what would have to happen, right? The EU would have to say, listen, we are going to fight the Russians and and defeat them. Doing so could expose something really dangerous about the EU, which is that they might not be militarily all that strong, right? Yes, you can say they fly F-35s, they have sophisticated fighter jets, but the most troops they could field, put onto the battlefield at any one time, is approximately, less than a tenth of the current size of the Ukrainian armed forces. And it's not clear that even if the EU was to fly its F-22s and F-35s, that these would have the capacity to demolish the Russian military at scale. Could be a case where they're able to launch a few dozen, maybe a few hundred strikes against Russian targets. But beyond that, there may not be any additional advantage that they can incur. And so I think the fear that EU policymakers have is not that they is not the dangers of entering a war that would result in KIA. The danger might be that the EU might intervene on the side of Ukraine and then get exposed as not actually being able to meaningfully help. That their contributions between an underfunded military, a defense establishment that simply doesn't understand the reality of modern war, they may just be, well, cooked. And without the United States, who, again, I know you're going to show up in the comments and tell me, listen, Trump said the latest thing and now he likes Ukraine. Trump has vacillated on Ukraine, his statements, literally dozens of times. There is no reason to take his statements as being reflective of U.S. policy. And to date, the administration has made virtually no actions to support its Ukrainian ally in its war against Russia, taken virtually none. It has exploited Ukraine for minerals deals. It has forced the EU to purchase weapons that had previously been provided as an aid to Ukraine. It has terminated Ukrainian intelligence sharing. It has deprived them of Patriot missiles and other even congressionally agreed upon aid. The only thing that has objectively been done explicitly for Ukraine's benefit has been an additional tariff on India, tariffs that in all likelihood the president was already going to impose. And those tariffs have not actually diminished India's willingness or ability to purchase Russian oil. And almost immediately after imposing those tariffs, the Trump administration sat down with India and began to find some kind of deal to get them to get those tariffs lifted. So it's tough to believe that there's been no signal from the United States that they have any interest in defending NATO territory. If Russia were to try something in NATO territory, I suspect the United States would do little more than simply provide moral support to NATO. There's been no evidence that they would do anything else. So the question now, you see that the EU is having probably one of its largest security tests since its creation. And so far, it appears to be failing. Guys, if you want to help out the Ukrainians themselves, I partnered with Ukraine Aid Ops on their latest fundraiser to raise funds for the units in Kramatorsk. The original goal, $300,000. We have an anonymous donor who is matching dollar for dollar. So if you want to donate, now is the time. And we are so close to hitting our target. The you can see that it's to some of the units that I've personally met, some of the best units in the Ukrainian military, the 93rd, 25th, Azov, 79th, SOF, 82nd, Liu, all guys I have, again, met when I was in Ukraine last year. These are top tier units, and we're giving them exactly what they need. They tell us, listen, we need drones, we need power stations, antennas, and all the basics, all the things you don't think about that if you don't have, nothing works. Cables, spare batteries, all the things. We ask them, what do you need? And Ukraine Aid Ops hooks them up. So, but you guys are the ones who make it possible. And look at you guys. Dylan dropping $1,000. Albert dropping nearly $600. Robert McIntyre $150. $400 from Eric. There was even somebody here in memory of my beautiful Charlotte, Adam, donating $400. You guys stepping up in a huge way for these guys. And it makes a difference. It makes a tremendous difference. I can tell you personally, you guys who are members over on Combat Vet News know that on Tuesday, we passed along a message sent to us from the Liu Brigade, including a lot of videos showing that the latest gear we hooked them up with is actively taking out Lancets, Gerberas, keeping the skies over Ukraine free and clear, and keeping units and civilians safe. So you guys get to see in beautiful HD just how much you are helping. And those of you that are members at Combat Vet News get to also support me, the channel, the team, and keep me able to do this every single day. So the link to that is in the description as well if you want to join and become a member. Thanks to all our Colonel tier members, guys like Yanko Georgiev, Bastian Himmerling, Michael Fry, Christine Schumann, Chris Holmes, Deborah Oppenheimer, as well as all of our Lieutenant tier members. We could not do it without you guys. You guys make this whole thing possible. Thank you so much. Cheers.